quite the intro, Pastor Bennett. Transparently, I am nervous. I prefer smaller group settings. So the whole mic, this is just really dramatic for me. Um, so bear with me. If it's okay, I like to open up with prayer. Father, in the name of Jesus, I thank you for an opportunity to share with your most prized possession, your people. We thank you, Lord, that you are healing. You are Jehovah Shalom, the God of peace. And it is your desire, Lord, that we prosper and be in good health, even as our souls prosper. Tonight, Lord, we ask that you shed light on areas, Lord, that have been hidden in darkness for too long. We ask, Lord, that your healing power flow to where it's needed the most, Lord. You know what every heart needs, God. I ask, Lord, that you enter the room and you let healing begin now. And I ask, Lord, that everything that is said be unto your glory. We ask, Lord, that no flesh glory in your sight. You be in the center. And we thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. All right. So tonight I'm sharing on mental health. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to share on a subject that I have a passion for. And when I was asked to share on the topic of mental health, I tried to think of what would be something that is relevant for the times in which we're living. And we live in a time where everyone has access to a phone, to a camera, to a podcast mic, right? And there's a lot of misinformation about mental health and wellness. So I think that in order for people to be empowered, it's important to first be able to identify when something sounds a little bit off. And I love the direction that we've moved just in time and space and history when it comes to talking about mental health. We've moved from it being more of a taboo topic to being a little bit more embraced. So I think it's important for the people of God to be able to accurately identify information about mental health, but more importantly, know what God says about it. All right, so next slide, Sean. I can't see those screens. Okay, there we go. All right, so just really quickly, this is what we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to do a brief introduction of myself. I'm going to do a short icebreaker to test your knowledge on how much you know about mental health. You may be surprised that you know more than you think you know, and if you don't, that's okay too. That's what tonight is for. Then we're going to talk about what mental health actually is. We're going to go over some common diagnoses that we hear and some misinformation around those. We're also going to cover stigma, and if time allows, we're also going to talk about keeping God at the center of the discussion always, and that we're not idolizing mental health or even how we maintain our mental health and wellness. And if we have time, we'll do a short reflection exercise, and then I'll open the floor up for some Q&A. All right. All right, so just a little bit about me. Again, I'm Brittany Harrison. Just a formal introduction for me. I am a wife and mother. My husband Keith, who y'all see play here on Sunday sometimes, we just made 11 years this September, so I'm proud of that. He is my biggest supporter, so I thank God for him. And my three beautiful children as well. The one that I'm holding in the picture, I'm sure you all see me trying to wrangle her every single Sunday. So keep me lifted in prayer with that one. God bless her. And I take my job as a mother seriously. If I don't get anything else right, I have to get that right. I have to know that they know who God is and that they have a God consciousness. That is the most important goal for me, that I steward the responsibility I've been given as being a mother well. So as Pastor Bennett said, I do have a degree in psychology where I went to the Virginia State University. I'm a proud HBCU graduate. And during my time there, I traveled a lot with the gospel chorale, and I had a lot of fun with that. That helped shape just who I was as a person. And from there, I went to LaSalle University and obtained a master's in clinical counseling with a focus in marriage and family therapy. And when I tell you that program stretched me, I'm a church girl born and bred and raised, and that program really caused me to tear down a lot of the things that I thought about the world and just my own spirituality to make it a little more solid so that I'm not afraid to question things about my faith so that I can defend it when it's time. My education has opened a lot of doors for me. I had the opportunity to have a feature in Black Enterprises web series, Perspectives and Equity, where I shared on mental health in the workplace. And then last year, I actually was a panelist at a global disability conference in Las Vegas, speaking on mental health and wellness there as well. So, more personally for me, the topic of mental health, it's important for me that we are talking about mental health in sacred spaces and faith communities. And it is a passion of mine. In 2023, I actually started a podcast called the Logos Podcast, where I wanted to really have conversations around building the bridge between mental health and wellness and the faith-based community. You don't have to choose between one or the other. If healing is the children's bread, we can marry those two things together, but we first have to get rid of the stigma of it and really challenge the misinformation around it. Also, I'm working on a course called the Psychologically Safe Church, and that's really just helping to empower church leaders to create safe spaces. Sometimes there are things that are passed down generationally and historically that are damaging, and sometimes we don't know. So just kind of bringing light to how we can create safe communities for people to really come and learn about God and continue to make disciples. And then lastly, I am working on, excuse me, a self-guided journal called More Than a Member, and it's really to help people who are navigating their healing journey. Of if they experience church hurt or religious trauma or spiritual abuse, and really just helping them walk through those things with a godly perspective. Because I don't believe that you have to leave the faith just because you've seen misrepresentation of him. And just on a personal note, I love documentaries in my spare time, and I love to cook. I have some of my family in here, and they are tough critics. And if you cannot cook, they will let you know. So I must be doing a good job, and that is something that I love to do as well. Okay. All right. So, okay, go back one. Okay, go back. One more. There we go. All right. So, a pet peeve of mine is when someone reads word for word verbatim off of a slide. That was a pet peeve of mine in college because I can read the slides myself. Like, I want to know what you know. But for all intents and purposes tonight, I am going to read this slide line for line because I do think it's important that I am responsible with the information that I'm sharing. So tonight's talk is not a substitute for seeking professional help. This is not a group therapy session. It is also not a tool to be used as a way for self-diagnosis. The material shared is for informational purposes only. So while I do hope that you leave more confident on the subject matter, I don't want you to go out and say, okay, Brittany said that I had OCD, so I need help with that. Brittany did not say that. This is for informational purposes only. Okay. All right, so we can move forward. All right, so before we get started, I do just kind of want to read the room a little bit, and I wanted to know two questions, and you can just shout it out. What is one thing that you hope to learn tonight, and how can our time together be helpful to you? Yes. Okay, more about mental health. Anyone else? That's good. I like that. All right, one more. I love that. See, she's already talking about safe community. I love that. All right. All right, so I do think we will be able to cover a lot of the expectations that we have in the room tonight. So before we do that, we're going to do a quick test your knowledge exercise, okay? So these are true, false questions. If you think it's true, you will hold up a 1. If you think it's false, you will hold up a 2. If you are streaming, you can just drop your 1 or 2 in the chat, and you can participate as well. All right. So the first question is, schizophrenia and bipolar can be used interchangeably. Those are two terms that can be used interchangeably. If you think that's true, hold up a 1. If you think it's false, hold up a 2. You can go to the next slide, Sean. And there's the question in case you wanted to read it. All right, I see some 2s. Okay. Well, if you're holding up a two, you are correct. Schizophrenia and bipolar cannot be used interchangeably. Sometimes there's a big misconception about what those are, and we'll cover that tonight. All right. The next question: true or false? Depression is always characterized by sadness. If you think that's true, hold up a one. If you think it's false, hold up a two. I see some ones, I see some twos. All right, so it looks like a lot of y'all actually know more about mental health than y'all thought, too. If you held up a two, that is correct. Depression may not always be characterized by sadness, especially when we're looking at it through a cultural lens. When we look at the research, a lot of the research has been done on white males. So that leaves out a whole subgroup of people who may be experiencing depression, but it may not meet the textbook definition of what, or symptoms of what depression looks like. All right, next question. Schizophrenia means you have multiple personalities. If you think that's true, hold up a one. If you think that's false, hold up a two. All right, I'm seeing some ones, a couple of twos peppered in. Okay, unfortunately, if you're holding up a one, that is incorrect. Schizophrenia does not mean that you have multiple personalities. That's why I'm glad we're having these conversations tonight, right? I think sometimes people look at schizophrenia and a person with multiple personality disorder or dissociative disorder. And I think because they do share in common psychosis, which is not being able to distinguish between reality and what is not real, sometimes people get confused about that.
So, so no other tests have been done except just on the white male. They haven't do on any other group of people.
So they have, but it's not a lot. The majority of the research historically has focused on that particular population. Now we have come a long way, and there has been some updates to the data around what depression looks like in people of color and other diverse groups. But a lot of the criteria for what depression looks like, a lot of it has been centered around white males. Thank you for that question. That's a good clarifying question. All right, the next question, true or false? Mental illness can be prevented. I'm sorry. Yes. We're going to get to that. Yep, that's in here. We're going to get to that. Thank you for asking. Absolutely. All right, so the next question, true or false? Mental illness can be prevented. If you think that's true, hold up a one. If you think that that is false, hold up a two. All right, I see some twos. Lamont. All right, so that is false. Mental illness cannot necessarily be prevented. Now, God can intervene, right? We know that God can intervene, but typically mental illness cannot be prevented because we don't always know what we're predisposed to. Sometimes a big life stressor can trigger something that we didn't know was there, so it cannot always be prevented. All right, and our last question, true or false? Depression and anxiety are the two most prevalent mental health disorders. One, if you think it's true. Two, if you think it's false. Okay, I'm seeing some confidence dwindle a little bit in the room. Be bold about your response. Okay, I'm seeing some ones and I see some twos. All right, so that's true. Depression and anxiety are the two most prevalent mental health disorders. All right, so how do you think you all did? Okay, see, I told you may actually know a little more than you think you know. All right, so let's get into it. What is mental health? So if someone came to you and asked you, and how, in your definition, how would you define mental health?
I would think the things that I think in my mind on a regular basis, even self-conscious.
Okay,
And I guess it would be centered around what I'm around
okay.
that can contribute
So environment,
and my environment
okay,
can contribute to what what I um, what my thinking is on my
okay,
mental health.
okay. All right, anybody else? How would you define mental health?
Break down in your perception
Okay. Your perception. Okay. Anyone else?
Uh, take a take a stab at it. Uh, I think mental health has to do with how healthy your mind is and how healthy your body is and how healthy your environment is.
Okay. Okay. I like that on the comment. Yes.
Oftentimes, I guess in the fact that the job that I do, I work with a lot of mental health people,
Hmm.
and most of the time they got to be diagnosed because you can think that they have mental health issues, but you have to have a diagnosis before you're going to even know anyway.
Very good. I like that. Okay. All right. So I love all of those responses. Oh, okay. We have one more.
And it's your upbringing, your the way your brain is designed, your chemical balance. Um, it could be trauma or different past experiences that have contributed to your life that cause chemical imbalances that then causes you to have mental health breaks or again, but like he says, you have to have diagnoses to even come to that conclusion.
Definitely. So I heard a lot of things that contribute to our mental health: environment, experiences, biology. Mental health, in and of itself, is not good or bad. And I wanted to bring this up and open up with this because sometimes mental health and mental illness are used interchangeably and they shouldn't be. They're not the same thing. Mental health, in and of itself, is just the state of your mental well being at any given moment. So everyone has mental health, but not everyone necessarily has mental illness. Okay? All right. So when you think about mental health, I want you to think about mental wellness, mental illness, and another piece that we don't talk about a lot, but it is your mental hygiene. Okay. So mental wellness is your ability to cope with stressors. Mental wellness is also being in a balanced state. Like your default is a state of balance. Mental illness is the opposite of that. Something is disordered, something is misaligned, and you have and your behaviors show the symptoms of that. Now, mental hygiene is the maintenance of your mental well-being, how well you take care of your mental health. So when all of those things encompass mental health. All right, so I heard Sister Mashawn mention our brains and the way that our brains function, right? So the functions of our brain can be impacted by our environment. So there's a nature nurture aspect there. It can be impacted by our environment, the way we're raised, who we're raised by. And some things are more nature, innate, and it impacts the way that our brain functions. And the way that our brain functions contributes to the cycle that we see up here on the screen, contributes to the way that we think, our thoughts, the way we filter things, the way we see the world, the way we see ourselves. And that oftentimes is reflected in the way that we behave, the way that we present and show up in the world. So if you have mental wellness, the cycle here is not bad. There can always be room for improvement, but this is okay. If we're experiencing mental illness, we want to find a way to disrupt this cycle, to begin new pathways to create a more healthy cycle to promote mental wellness. All right, so mental wellness is the ability, as I said again, to cope with stressors. Typically, a good sign of mental wellness is you have healthy, harmonious, balanced relationships. You have the ability to think rationally. The function of your brain is able to function out all the gunk to allow you to see the world through a more sober lens. And you're emotionally sober. You're making decisions from a rational place. And you're in a continued state of balance and wholeness. Conversely, mental illness is the opposite of that. You are not able to cope with stressors as well. The slightest little inconvenience can cause you to spiral. If someone pulls one emotional thread, that's it. You're done for the rest of the month. year, week, whatever. You have an imbalanced state. Again, some things are disordered. You have tumultuous relationships. You're probably typically the common denominator in a lot of your failed relationships. You don't have a good brand in the systems that you're a part of, your family, your church community, your work system. And typically, stressors, instead of you having control of them, they trigger symptoms that cause you to have an imbalanced life. All right. So while we did discover during our icebreaker that mental illness is not necessarily preventable, there are some things we can do to maintain and to practice and promote mental wellness. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All right. So this brings us to the discussion of mental hygiene. Okay. Now, Ephesians 6:11 reminds us that we have to put on the whole armor of God. And that's what made me think of mental hygiene, made me think of that scripture. Sometimes as Christians, to put it frank, we can be a little bit lazy, right? We say we're turning it over to God, but we put no action behind the faith that proves that we believe that things are going to change. So it's no different than when people come to the altar and they maybe get delivered for something and we celebrate that, but then they leave uncovered because they don't have on any armor, right? It's the same with mental hygiene. With mental hygiene, we can armor ourselves, of course, with the word of God, prayer, and devotion, but then there are some practical things that we can do as well. Physical activity. Now, I am not the poster child for physical activity. I can assure you of that, okay? I do not like it. I do not enjoy it. But if I go for a 30-minute walk, even though I hate all 30 minutes of it, when I'm home, I feel a little bit lighter. My head feels a little more clear. I'm not as on edge or emotional, and I'm able to be a little bit more rational in the way that I'm seeing myself, my family, and the world. So it helps. Having a sense of community, which is why I'm so passionate about having psychologically safe churches and safe spaces where people can come and be in community safely together. I always tell my husband, we've only been coming for a short time, but Greater Refuge to me felt like a warm hug. For me, it was something that I needed. I wasn't quick to try and find a new church home just for the sake of saying I go somewhere. I wanted to be intentional about it. So community means everything. I always tell Pastor Bennett, it's been a long time since I felt excited about coming to church, and I hate if I miss because I have to be out of town or whatever. So I love being here and love coming here, and community fills your cup. Right, we had an awesome time at the Harvest Fest this past weekend, and shout out to everybody who put that together. It was a beautiful time, and you don't realize how much you need that sense of community until you don't have it. So that continues to a healthy mental well-being as well. Also, nutrition. Again, this is not something that I always practice good nutrition, but it is essential, right? When we're being mindful about what we're eating, the quantities of the amount of things that we're eating. Are we trying to overcompensate for something because we're ignoring something emotionally? Are we making better choices maybe 2 to 3 times a week? Are we reaching for the salad instead of the chips or the Chick-fil-A? Lord help me, I need to be delivered from Chick-fil-A, okay? I'm the first to admit that. But it makes a difference, all right? And engaging in hobbies, things that you enjoy, things that you gravitate to, whether it's knitting or music or reading, whatever, if you're creative, whatever that is, being intentional about making time for that. And then also being intentional about maintaining your physical health, keeping your doctor's appointments, being honest with your doctor when you have that time and space with them, because you could be experiencing mental health issues because your hormone levels are imbalanced, or you're experiencing some sort of vitamin deficiencies. So be honest about what you're dealing with when you do have the opportunity to speak to your healthcare provider. Any questions so far? No, because I know what I know, but I'm more curious about what you know and what you want to know. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into some common mental health diagnosis. All right. But before we do that, I do want to highlight the word criteria, which Brother Conrad called out and Sister Rashawn called out in terms of actually diagnosing people. And criteria is important because, again, we have access to Google and ChatGPT and YouTube and all these things that are packed with information. But we don't always understand the technical side of what it takes to actually obtain a diagnosis. So you can go to the next slide, Sean. So, a criteria is a standard that is used to make a judgment, plain and simple, right? So, unless you meet the criteria, you probably shouldn't be self diagnosing, okay? All right, so with the criteria, before receiving a mental health diagnosis, there are certain things that you have to meet. No two diagnoses have the same standards of meeting a criteria. One mental illness, you may have to meet 2 to 3 of the criteria. Another one, you may have to meet 6 to 8 of the criteria on the list of symptoms. And again, it looks different for each thing. They're measuring two things typically: the symptoms that you are reporting having, and it's time bound. How long have you been experiencing the symptoms? That is what the mental health professional will be looking at. Okay? Where they get this criteria is from this book here. It's a tool that is used called the DSM, also known as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. When I was in graduate school many years ago, we were in volume 4. Now we are up to the DSM-5. This DSM for short. And to go back to Elder Coleman's question about the research, because we are having a change in cultural norms and societal norms due to research, we're going to continue to see new volumes of this book evolve. Again, this assists your mental health professional with understanding the criteria for the symptoms that you're explaining to them that you have. So if you do go to a mental health professional and they are collecting information, be patient. You want someone who's taking their time and that you're not having someone who's just overly diagnosing you. All right, so we are going to get into it. And before we get into the first one, I just want to clarify that what we're looking at tonight are disorders. Like we talked about before, the opposite of mental wellness is mental illness, and typically those are characterized by being disordered in some way. So the first one is depression. Okay, so before looking at the screen, if you haven't already, how would you describe depression, or what does depression look like to you? Deep sadness. Anyone else? Weight, okay.
A constant feeling of, I don't know, that something is wrong and you can't figure it out, but it pulls you down.
Okay, okay. One more. How would you describe depression? Okay. Absolutely. So yes, all of these things can encompass a person who's experiencing depression. And no, you don't have to necessarily receive a diagnosis to have feel depression. At some point, a lot of us in this room have felt depressed for one reason or another. But typically, like I said before, always remember what goes into a diagnosis is how long you've been experiencing these symptoms. So someone mentioned sadness. So yes, a feeling of profound sadness. Maybe you are not eating enough or you eat too much. Maybe you're sleeping a lot. Maybe you're having a hard time maintaining relationships because you're isolating. You have extreme fatigue, loss of energy, and all you want to do is just lay down and lay around. Maybe you're experiencing anhedonia, which means it's a sudden loss in interest in things that you once enjoyed, and you're just pulling away from everything and you don't enjoy it. It sounds like what you were describing, Pastor Bennett, was feelings of hopelessness, right? Like it's something that I feel like I just cannot get out of. It seems like there's no end in sight. And reoccurring thoughts of death or suicide, right? I know some of you mentioned, how do I know if someone is in crisis? So just because a person thinks about death does not mean they're suicidal necessarily, right? It could just be that they feel so overwhelmed with what's going on that death just seems like an escape from your problems. However, if you're suicidal, a person who is suicidal typically has given a lot of thought to it, and they have a plan for how they're going to do it. So if you're ever encountering somebody who and you're questioning them and they are able to share details on how they have contemplated what they would do, they are probably in crisis and you should help them seek help. Okay? All right. Um, Next is bipolar. So you can be honest, this is a safe space. How many people in jest have ever called somebody bipolar because they were having mood swings? Okay, right? We've all done it, right? We've all done it. the the trouble with that, even if we don't mean harm, the trouble with that is when we make jokes and use words like someone's bipolar or schizo or crazy, right? It takes away the experience that the person is having, and it's almost making a caricature of the person who's experiencing it. These are real things that people are experiencing. And when we use those words in jest or just casually use them and throw them around, it almost takes away also the humanity of the person that's experiencing it. And we forget that these people who are experiencing these really difficult situations and struggles are worthy of empathy and care and compassion. Okay, so a person who is experiencing bipolar, and it used to be called manic depression back in the day, but now it's referred to as bipolar. So they're experiencing some of the symptoms of depression that we talked about in the last slide, but then on the upswing, they experience something called mania, or they're experiencing a manic episode. So this may look like feelings of euphoria. They may feel like they can do anything. They may feel really happy, but they can't really explain why. Sometimes they engage in risky behavior because they are very impulsive. And sometimes they can be really, really productive without needing a lot of sleep. They may be able to go days without sleep. And that's when they're on the upswing of mania. And it's bipolar because they're experiencing two extremes, two different extremes of their mood. And it is experience in the behavior that you may that you may be seeing when they are around. So language matters, right? Language matters. We want to be careful, and I've even with all my degrees and all the things, sometimes I have to be careful that I'm not just throwing around the word, for example, crazy, just cavalierly, because people are really struggling with real issues. Yes.
Are there any specific triggers that can cause those episodes? Something out of the norm like that?
So sometimes, just like I mentioned before, if you're experiencing mental illness, any type of stressors can trigger a manic episode. And many of the things that we're talking about tonight, whether it's depression, anxiety, sometimes life just happens, and any type of stress can trigger any type of erratic behavior or something that we would consider to be deviating from the norm. So yes, typically stress will trigger that. Very good question. All right, next, anxiety. How would you describe anxiety? Yes. Anxiousness? Okay. Yes. Oh, yeah, that bridge is no joke. I don't like that bridge either, going across the 301 bridge. But yes, having feelings of nervousness, extreme nervousness. Anyone else? Yes, worry associated with fear.
You don't want a whole lot of confrontation. Try this. You at one level, you don't want to
Okay, so you try to avoid confrontation. Okay, being avoidant. Okay. So we all experience anxiety on some level, right? There is a healthy level of anxiety that we experience. Anxiety typically will trigger a flight or fear response, where we stay and defend and fight, or we escape the situation if it doesn't feel safe. I experienced anxiety before I got up here to speak to you all tonight. No matter how many times I speak, I experience anxiety. I know I stress my husband out. Sorry about that, but he knows that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, right? Uh, Anxiety is our brain's way of protecting us so that we know when we need to get out of a situation or if we need to defend ourselves. What distinguishes anxiety as a disorder is if it is interfering with your activities of daily living and it impacts your relationships and you are having an inability to function, right? Excessive worry, like someone called out, and you don't have an ability to control it. A lot of times, these thoughts and feelings are irrational. right? We can't, it doesn't really make sense, but we just experience a fear of the unknown. The what if, right? What happens if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to? Or what happens if it does turn out the way I want it to? Will I be able to handle it? Will I be able to handle success? Will I be able to handle whatever it is my next level, or where I'm supposed to be? Sometimes we can physically feel anxiety, right? In our stomach, tension in our shoulders, our jaws being clenched, our fists being clenched. And sometimes these things are happening subconsciously. We don't even realize it, right? All right. Next, we're going to talk about PTSD. Has anyone ever heard of PTSD? Okay? And PTSD is short for post traumatic stress disorder. Typically, when we hear people talk about PTSD, we think about people who've been in the military, who've been involved in combat, but just everyday common people can experience PTSD as well, because it's something that you experience after a traumatic event, whether it's an assault, some type of abuse, surviving a natural disaster, just anything that was traumatic, right? Some of the symptoms of PTSD is avoiding areas that may trigger memories. We are experiencing PTSD through our senses, right? So being triggered by a smell, by a noise, by the taste of something. So trying to be avoidant of those things may be a sign that you are triggered by those things. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes.
That is so amazing that you said that because I remember being a child, certain places I didn't like being, and some songs people think, oh, these are oldies but goodies. But for me, when I hear that particular song, it brings back emotions that I felt at that time.
That is true. Because one thing about trauma, the body never forgets. Even if we bury it, the body never forgets. So you heard the commercial and you didn't think much of it, but it brought you back to that time. And sometimes that can be the things that we try to avoid, can be the thing that is trying to bring us to our healing. Sometimes we experience what's called arrested development, right? So certain times in our development, our childhood, our life, maybe early adulthood, there was something that happened, and we wonder why we respond to things or people in maybe immature ways, or we blow things out of proportion, or whatever the case may be. Even though we may be 52, if something happened at 14, certain parts of us are still arrested at that age of 14. And that's why we need God to shine his light in those areas and in those places. And we have to know how to target our prayers. Lord, I've come to the end of myself. I repent for trying to use other things to soothe pain and to soothe things I didn't understand or frustrations. And I humbly repent and ask that you show me where this is coming from, and go on that journey with God, and he'll help you to be healed in those areas. All right. Next is OCD. This is another one we throw around casually, right? If we see someone who is overly passionate about the cleanliness of their home, we may say they're OCD. If they wash their hands a lot, like myself, I'm not OCD, but I'm just hyper aware of germs and contamination, because people do really nasty things, right? But what distinguishes the difference between OCD and a person who may just have a few quirks is the obsessive thoughts around a thing, right? So OCD is short for obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So obsession is the thought, the ruminating thoughts, the intrusive thoughts that won't quit. The compulsion, however, is the action that's being carried out to relieve the anxiety from the obsessive ruminating thoughts, right? So if you have obsessive thoughts, for example, about fear of contamination, right? The compulsion is that you clean excessively because you have an irrational fear of contamination. Sometimes you'll see people who may do rituals where they're checking the door to make sure it's locked 5 times before they leave the house because they have an irrational fear of not feeling safe if that is not done. Right? So all of these things are coming to disturb our peace. I hope y'all are seeing the common thread that we're seeing through all of these things, that these things do not come from God, right? If sometimes they may be overly attentive to symmetry, like if you open their pantries or their refrigerator, it's immaculate. All the labels are turned to the front. Everything is in order and where it should be, right? And it's just again an obsessive thoughts that are irrational about, and it's sometimes that you things that you can't control. You have a hard time controlling the thoughts. All right, so I'll just wrap up here for the sake of time, and we do have a part two in a few weeks. Okay, to just kind of put a pin in the anxiety piece. Anxiety, again, is just ruminating and intrusive thoughts about the future, right? We're not worried about stuff that happened before. I don't know that they have a diagnosis yet about things that have happened in the past that we're worried about. I guess it could be the PTSD piece we just talked about. But anxiety is worry about what's going to happen in the future. And Philippians 4:6 and 7 tells us to not be anxious for anything. This is one of my favorite scriptures. But to submit all things to God through prayer and supplication, and He will give us peace, right? How many times have we done something to silence the noise in our head, but it wasn't necessarily sinful, but it didn't center God in it, right? Matthew 6:34 tells us not to worry or concern ourselves with things of tomorrow because it has enough trouble of its own, right? So at my intro, y'all heard that I'm a mother of three. And I don't know how many of you growing up heard a parent or an adult or an elder tell a child to stand a child's place, right? So I'm a child of the king. So if I'm worrying about what's happening tomorrow, I'm not staying in my place as a child, right? What's happening tomorrow is none of my business. It's in the hands of God. So Matthew 6:34 encourages us to not concern ourselves with the things that are going to happen tomorrow because each day has enough trouble of its own, right? So go to bed. Don't worry about it. I know easier said than done, but take Matthew 6:34 with you on your way to bed and said the word told me not to worry, so I'm not going to worry, right? All right. So I will pause there if that's okay. And I want to take any questions. Yes. Okay. So again, when we talk about something that's disordered, does it impact your life, the activities of your daily life? Does it impede your life in any way? And does it impact your relationships with people? Okay. Okay. So so I wouldn't say that's OCD. I just think that's extreme preference. You have a preference for how you like things to be. He has a preference for how he likes things to be. So that sounds more like a relationship dynamic thing rather than you having OCD. But if it really is, I don't want to minimize what I'm saying. If it really is impairing your life in some way, okay, or if it's being a detriment to your relationship, then there could be something there. But if it's not impairing your life in any way, then I would say no, that you don't have OCD. Yes, OCD. If you to be formally formally to say that a person has OCD, that diagnosis would need to come from a mental health professional. Yes, yes, yes. Hmm. That is 100% correct. And we didn't get a chance to get to that tonight, but that's almost verbatim on my section about stigma, right? Because we have ideas, attitudes, and beliefs around mental health, we are probably the least likely to self report. We are the least likely to actually go and get help because of the messages that we've received about mental health. So, for example, with depression, right? I named some of the symptoms that we typically see in terms of meeting the criteria for that. However, in populations that are historically or have been historically oppressed, it may look different, right? It may look like irritability. It may look like overachieving. It may look like aggression. It may look like, for example, maybe older African American males are more stoic, right? In really exciting times or experiences, they really don't show a lot of emotion. Or if something is sad, they may not show a lot of emotion because we've been conditioned and wired to express ourselves differently, which is why sometimes we may be go undiagnosed at all because there's not enough representation in the data to express how depression may look in African American males between certain ages, or African American women certain ages is, and even people of faith, y'all. Right? How much research is out there about what depression looks like with people of faith? Because we sometimes feel like we have to say, to, like as I said before, live in the tension of having to choose between being saved and being a Christian, and I'm going to look like I'm spiritually weak, or I'm experiencing a moral failure because my faith wasn't enough to sustain me, when that's really not true, right? So we need people who are contributing to these studies and really giving the information so that representation, first of all, is in the forefront, and so that we can start to have resources and support around our faith-based communities. So I'm glad that you brought up that point, and that's very true. Sometimes we are either overly diagnosed, we're misdiagnosed, or we don't get diagnosed at all. So we don't always have the support that we need. Okay. All right. I have time for maybe one more question. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say I'm glad that this is being done a lot more now in churches.
Yes.
And it's like what Conrad was saying, um, when we were coming up, we didn't have information on this. We weren't taught to do this. And like you just said, that's important too. Christians will feel like they fell somewhere.
Yes. Yes.
And then I heard someone say this too. I heard someone say that mental illness is an illness. And it's like this. If someone had cancer or tuberculosis, we wouldn't laugh or joke about that sickness.
Not at all.
But we laugh and joke about mental illness.
Yes, we do.
But mental illness is an illness just like a cancer or tuberculosis, like any other disease. And it should be treated like that and not made fun of. And I
Yes.
think that's one of the biggest things is being made fun of.
Yes.
The loony, the crazy, as a bed bug.
Yep.
All of these different type of, you dumb and stupid. So that's kind of like embarrassing
Absolutely.
to go and, you don't want to go nowhere and say to a doctor what somebody called you. You're loony. Yeah, I'm loony. So
Absolutely.
I'm just glad that it's being shared more.
Yes.
People like you are getting educated in it to bring it to the church of Christendom so that we can learn about it and learn to be able to differentiate between mental and spiritual
Absolutely.
and or biologically something's wrong. Sometimes it's a medical issue, not,
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, thank you.
So to gain that knowledge and know.
No, thank you for bringing that up.
There's a lot to it. And what I saw, and most of these, I could be wrong, but most of these definitions, it looked like stresses and all of them. Like
Absolutely.
stresses, every one of them.
Absolutely. Yes.
I give it back off of Mr. Coleman. Coleman here. Press someone to applaud you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Delving into areas and with an apostolic Pentecostal background.
Yes.
Still
Yes.
able to navigate up to this level of educating yourself and now you're educating others. Secondly, I want to applaud Pastor Bennett
Yes.
for
Mm.
It was either spiritual or demonic. And if someone needed teaching or needed help on mental health, they wouldn't allow you to bring that into the church. And so I applaud this session. And did I hear you say there's a part two?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. And when that part two come, Pastor Bennett, we're gonna push that and see can we have the whole church there. If the whole church can't get you on Wednesday night, we're gonna put you up on Sunday morning.
After service? Yeah.
Uh, when you got to the part there that talks about uh, health, health play a part sometime in what's going on in our mental health. And I remember an incident there being assigned to the foreign fields, Dominican Republic, Haiti, going places. I didn't know these folk. I didn't know how they operate. I couldn't even speak their language in many times. And I had what was called I diagnosed myself. I say I had an anxiety attack in a situation. I walked into a situation. I mean, this church was in trouble, and I walked into it. And now, while I'm there, because of what they taught us, I'm not taking up too much time. But what they taught us, I'm the bishop, and I'm supposed to have the answer. When I got, I'm supposed to have the answer, and the answer seemed like it was too much for me because what was going on, I'm trying to decipher, I'm trying to fix it, I'm trying to come up with an answer, and all of a sudden, in the meeting that I'm presiding over, I went into this trembling and shaking and uncontrollable, that had never happened to me. And so later on, someone described that there was a nurse on the trip with us, and she was saying that my blood pressure spiked and my sugar dropped. I ain't got no sugar. I had no blood pressure here. But what was going on at that particular time, I labeled it as an anxiety attack. So the question is, when you're under extreme pressure, is it possible for your metabolism or how your body operating to change and to trigger something else that's going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because our mental and emotional is not that far from our physical, right? And as we talked about before with the cycle of how our brain functions, it affects how we think and it manifests in our behavior and how we presenting. So absolutely, you could have had something that caused a reaction physically, right? And it affected you biologically, which caused you to experience those symptoms. Absolutely. So that's not far off at all. Absolutely. Self-diagnosis, right? You were doing the best you could with what you had at the time. And thank you for sharing that historical aspect of mental health in the church setting and how it's not always something that has been embraced and welcomed into these spaces. So I thank God for forward-thinking leaders and being able to have the foresight to say, hey, this is the direction that we're going in as a society, because sometimes we just preach to each other, to church people, and there are people, a whole group of people that we're missing. And going back to the psychologically safe spaces in church, if people are coming into your atmosphere and your leaders don't know a lot about mental health and wellness, sometimes they don't feel like this is a place for them. So they're still searching and they're still seeking. So I agree with you, Bishop Peters. I thank Pastor Bennett for even opening this up, because there aren't a lot of churches who are, especially apostolic Pentecostal churches, that are talking about this. So I love the direction that we're going with this. And I thank you all for making this easy for me. I enjoyed hanging out with you all, and I didn't cover everything, but we will get to that in the next part. And if you have any questions for me after this, I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions that you have. All right. Thank you.
Let's give Brittany a hand. I am certainly so honored to have Brittany here. I believe that the Lord sent her to this house. And I tell you, uh, the event we had on Saturday was really wonderful because so many times, what is it? You're so heavenly minded that you know earthly good. Sometimes we so spiritual and walking around, speaking in tongues. But as I watch our church out there just having a good time and the children throwing football, I was saying to, you doctor yet? I'm gonna name her Doc. I was telling Brittany that a lot of times healing don't always take place on the altar. Sometimes healing takes place in places like the fest that we had. I'm so thankful to have people in this place that God is sending to bless this place. I'm telling you, in my mind, I believe, in my heart, I believe that God is changing the DNA of GRC. I believe that God is downloading into this house knowledge and things that are helping us to be better. I love our motto. I got to get it. GRC, you make this the place to be. Let's give the Lord a hand praise for that.